Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started so we can be done promptly at 10. Welcome, everybody, to the Legislative Issues Meeting. Guy Walker, 2017 Chairman of the Board of Salina Area Chamber of Commerce. And I'll quickly introduce the legislators. I have Senator Randall Hardy, Representative Stephen Johnson, Representative Diana Dirks, and Representative J.R. Clays. And same as before, the format of the meeting, we'll have opening remarks from the legislators, questions from the audience. Please write down your questions. You'll see the pads and pencils spread out throughout the hall, and you can hand those to Dawn or somebody else, and they'll bring them up to me. And I'll try to kind of organize them. Usually there's a theme of questions, so I try to combine them if I can. And then we'll have some closing remarks from the legislators. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Good morning. Welcome to this legislative update. I'm very happy to be back. Last night I was in Abilene. There was a chamber after hours, and I visited with residents in Abilene last night at Abilene Place, which is Senior Living Assisted Living Center, and had a good time there. I just want to start out. It's kind of a trivia, bit of trivia. March is the Women History Month, and I just wanted to let you know that on the in the national level of Congress, we have 19% of the legislators are women. In the Kansas legislature, 32% of the legislators are women. So Kansas is ahead of the curve there, and we're doing our job of having everyone represented in Topeka. We just finished week number 9. It seems like a year and a half. Things are moving, and I'm afraid to say too much because we've had what we call turnaround week now, where the Senate bills have gone to the House, and the House is working those bills, and then the House bills are being worked in the Senate, and and so I may be stealing some of the thunder from the House members, so I'm going to tread a little lightly this morning. But I will mention some bills that we've just passed recently. The Senate. In a series of votes, we had a Salina City Commission session in Topeka this past week. The Senate sat from 2:30 to 9:30 p.m. working 13 bills, and so it brought back memories of the times that we sat in the City Commission for hours on end discussing matters important to Salina. But they didn't serve us pizza there. We did hammer out the rescission bill on the Senate side. That's the bill that fills the $350 million hole that we have left to fill on for 2017. We're doing it. We decided through a series of votes that it was too late, too little, and too late to try to do a tax, or not a tax, but a spending cut bill for this year, seeing as we only have 3 months left in the fiscal year. And so we opted for a series of pretty much what amounts to borrowing from ourselves that will get us through 2017, and then we'll pay those amounts back starting in 2018, which begins July 1. The other bill that I was very excited about was the bill to restore the Medicaid cuts, that 4% cut that was brought into play. I don't know how long ago, 2 years, year and a half, something like that. The Senate just voted on the bill to restore those cuts for Medicaid. We did, and both the House and the Senate. I'll go ahead and say this. There was a fast moving bill in the House and the Senate to help the farmers that have been, or the ranchers that, excuse me, that have been devastated out in southwestern part of the state through providing them sales tax exemption for fencing materials to get back on their feet. We had in the Senate this week, I was honored to bring the Abilene state championship wrestling team into Topeka and presented them with a Senate tribute for their accomplishment. We'll be doing the same, Representative Clays and I will be doing the same thing with the Sacred Heart basketball team. That's one of the fun things that we get to do in Topeka is to honor people that are doing great things back in the district. And I'd like to, I'll also be honoring debate and forensics, the valedictorian. So I'm going to branch it out a little bit as well. And so anyway, that's, oh, and one other thing, and in 2018, if you would like to take part in our Senate floor debates, we're going to be doing live video streaming starting in the session in 2018 of all the floor debates. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Stephen Johnson. Good to be with you again. Thanks again to the Chamber, to AT&T, and Katie for being here today, as well as sponsoring consistently. Senator Hardy gave a good overview of everything that was done, and I stopped by their marathon session to watch. I was interested in the fencing bill and the rescission bill to see what the Senate did there, as those are big steps for us. The fencing bill was interesting. It's actually listed as introduced this week, and then it passed both chambers this week. So that may be one of the faster bills that I've seen. That's a real tribute, actually, to staff. It's very hard on them to go through that process like that, and they put in a lot of time. It was actually introduced in the committee and written Thursday night, read in on the floor on Friday. We used that number then to schedule the hearing for Monday, which was pretty quick. People really didn't have a chance to react, but we thought people agreed to it. We worked it immediately on the same day, which is unusual. It just takes a vote of the committee to work it the same day you hear it. The House leadership held the House session open for us, so we meet at 3:30. The reviser left the meeting and went down to rewrite the bill as amended, and they turned it in on the House floor Monday night so that it could be on general orders on Tuesday, get to the Senate and back to the House and through the process. So thankfully, a lot of people cooperated on that, but the need was pretty clear, and there was a decent track to run with that bill. The rescission bill, another big piece for us making progress together. The major difference as I see it, and of course we have Representative Clays, who's on the Budget Committee and actually sits through most of the meetings. I wind up leaving during a lot of them, so I often have to get caught up on what happens for a few of the minutes there. But in the House, the pooled money funds that we borrow so that there are not cuts made, particularly to education, which is the bigger part of the budget for the rest of the year. The Senate does not borrow all of those in the bill that they have, and the House does. And then the key difference is the Senate then layers the payment to KPERS, which pays that KPERS payment back over the coming years. In the House, we used any ending balance funds that were available in part to pay the KPERS payment, and we think we'd actually be able to make the very most of the KPERS payment by structuring it that way. So I think that's the biggest thing that'll have to be hammered out in the conference committee. Hopefully that bill can get done and on its way. The big question in my world as we go forward, we're at day 60 now with the veto session. That cuts some days off. We need to have a plan of how we balance 18 and 19 by the end of this month, which means during this week, we all need to get to the point of coming together not on only what we want to do, but what we're going to do. And that plan needs to be there. So the following week, we can start working that through the chambers and have a chance in the conference committees to work. While we are expecting our first adjournment on the 7th of April, there's a couple of days that conference committees will meet and we'll have conference committee reports. So that last week is kind of lost for the process of working things through, and hopefully there's something that can take shape fairly quickly. I think we are close to those on both sides. Certainly since we were here last, there was the process and perhaps the drama of the veto and override that we had on the tax bill. The tax bill that we had in the House is not perfect. There are a lot of good reasons to vote against it. As we closed on that discussion, the discussion that I had was to consider that difficult choice among ever worse alternatives. Also refer to how we balance the budget as having to mix a cocktail of bad ideas. There are not good choices between either cutting or raising revenue, and those won't taste good as we go forward. But there are a lot of things that are being done to try and get there. In transportation, as Representative Clays can fill you in, how do we come up with a way to meet at least the preservation part of the road project so that we can maintain what we have? And he's done a lot of work to try and make sure that that part is protected. And that goes through on other things. Representative Dirks works on the education policy, and a huge question going forward will be all the work done on education budget as well as in the education committee. But I'll look forward to continuing to work with folks on how we balance the budget. And as I'd written in some of the stuff before, I want to make sure that the budget problems are behind us rather than ahead of us.
I think everything's been covered, folks. No. Thank you. It's always great to be back here and to have such a nice crowd show up this morning. On the way home yesterday evening, I was sitting in the car, Heinz was driving, and I said, man, what am I going to talk about? I said, there are so many committees meeting, but actually not a whole lot of legislation being brought forth because most of the focus has been on taxes, the tax bill, rescission bill. You know, it's difficult to be able to produce a bill that has a fiscal note when we don't know what kind of funding that we're going to have. This is the House Bill 2270. This is the funding formula bill that K through 12 Budget Committee has been working on. They keep changing it. They're taking it piece by piece, and you know, from the LOB to some of the other aspects of that funding bill that needs to be addressed, the at-risk portion of it. So they're compiling it, and hopefully we'll have something coming out of that committee soon. They've been meeting after hours this week and trying to get something put together. On the fencing bill, I have something from the Kansas Livestock Association. It reported that 23 counties burned over 711,950 acres in Kansas this last week. It's the largest fire, referred to as the Starbuck Fire, burned over 500,000 acres of grasslands in Clark, Comanche counties. This fencing, the fencing bill composes that those farmers who had existing fences destroyed. That doesn't mean that we're going to give them a sales tax break on just because they want to build new fences. This is going to be predominantly for those individuals who are out there, and the tremendous loss of cattle, it just was devastating. And I was glad to see that moved forward quickly and that we all voted on it and got that passed out so that and that was also retroactive, that they'd already purchased some of those fencing supplies, that they were refunded the sales tax portion of it. So I think that was something, as Kansas, we had to group together and get something done to help our farmers. So that's the number one business in the state of Kansas at this point. Education-wise, we were honored to have the master teachers come and visit us in Education Committee, and we have one from Salina. Melinda Idle, kindergarten with Grace Stewart Elementary School, was one of the master teachers. It's awesome. Yes. We honored them on the House floor, and then, of course, they visited and gave us a brief little speech in our Education Committee. The Education Committee has really been pretty slow because we're, again, waiting to see what's going to happen with the K through 12 budget, and so we haven't really been working on a whole lot of bills. One of the things was Senate Bill 100 and the Senate Bill 166. Senate Bill 100 allowed scholarships for the mental health nurses in the Nursing Service Scholarship Program. I mean, that is a portion of the medical care that is really needing those nurses, and they're going to be offering scholarship. some of the other items that I had that's already been covered, so I don't want to repeat myself. In the Veterans Committee, there is a decal that's going to be produced. Now, you have your disabled veterans tags that you see, and then they're able to park in handicapped spaces. But there are also veterans who did not meet the requirements simply because of the amount of disability that they've had. But we've also had veterans later on that have been in horrendous wrecks, according to this one person who was there and testified. He is one of those victims that was in a humongous traffic accident and left him really unable to walk very far any distances. So we passed a bill out of committee that would provide that we would have a decal for those who didn't quite meet the disabled veterans, but in fact are veterans, so that he does not have to park the car clear over and have difficulty getting to a storefront. So we were happy that we were able to get that passed out. Of course, a lot of letters coming from folks on campus carry. I have information. And general government budget, this is where we pass the budgets out of that committee to go on to appropriations, make our recommendations. Every single one of the bills that left the general budget committee had a global coverage so that capers were to be paid. That was on each and every one that went out. There's one incident, I'll cover that later so I can pass the mic on to Representative Clays, but those are just some of the highlights of what we've been doing. Even though, you know, we're not able to get a whole lot of bills out, we are still in the process of working on things, especially in education, that will help our kids.
Good morning. Thank you, AT&T and the Salina Chamber, for hosting today and for everyone spending a Saturday morning with us here. Definitely appreciate you taking time to learn more about what's going on in your state government, and there are certainly some things I would like to update you on as far as bills that we have going through the process. You might recall HB 2006, that's the county commission expansion issue that we had here in Salina County, and addresses governor appointments and instead having an election in that. And that passed through the House, so we've done our work on the House side, and now we've kicked that over to Senator Hardy over in the Senate, who I'm working with to get that through on the Senate side, and I believe we have a hearing on that one in the Senate, so we'll see some progress on that shortly. There have been some changes made, and mostly it's just some money-saving ideas as far as trying to reduce the costs for our counties so that we're not spending a lot of money on multiple elections. So there's a few ideas floating out there. I don't think any of them are bad, just changing it up a little bit to try to save some dollars for the counties. HB 2036 is the aviation engineer tax credit. That passed the House. We did all of our work on the House floor on that and got that through. That incentivizes both attending a Kansas college or university in engineering or aviation studies, and then it also incentivizes the employment of that individual through a tax credit system. So it's a dual tax credit that gives a tax credit for reimbursing tuition, and then also gives a tax credit towards the salary of those full-time employees. That has a Senate hearing on Tuesday, so we'll look for that in Senate tax to be kicked out and then run across the Senate floor. HB 2168, I'm a co-sponsor of this. It passed the House as well. That's the Ad Astra Rural Jobs Act. That gives a tax credit for investing in businesses in rural areas, and I believe that Salina County qualifies on that one. HB 2184 is Star Bond reauthorization. That has a hearing next week in appropriations. I introduced that in appropriations because it's a pretty important bill, and we wanted to have some extensive hearings on that. But that's going to end up being an extremely important bill for us because the June 30 deadline for Star Bonds puts us in a position where we would not be able to, in Salina, sell our bonds under the statutory authority that's granted under the Star Bond Act. and that would have a detrimental effect on what we're trying to accomplish downtown. So I introduced that bill with hopes that it would be run early. Instead, it's been used as a political toy to get other people to do things that others want them to do while holding that bill hostage. So it's been sitting there for quite some time, but we do have a hearing next week, and we need to get something done. The unfortunate part is, even when we do get it through the House, we have to deal with the Senate, and the Senate has been vocally hostile as far as leadership is concerned towards star bonds. It's probably the best economic development tool we have in the state of Kansas. And the discussion now is kicking it to an interim study committee. Well, if this thing stops June 30th and we study this thing through the summer, we're going to have some serious problems because it won't be readdressed until 2018, and we can't allow that to happen. So I'd encourage you to contact your senator and see what we can get done on that on the Senate side, because it does need to be taken care of, even if it is just simply a reauthorization temporarily to get our existing projects through. We can't have that stall on the Senate side and go through processes that it doesn't need to go through because we already have it. There's not much more to study. HB 2385 is a tax proposal that has a hearing Monday that I introduced. And then HB 2403, we'll have a hearing on this Monday. This is probably the quickest I've ever introduced a bill and had a hearing on it. I introduced it yesterday, and it has a hearing Monday morning. It's, you've probably all heard of rural opportunity zones, and these are a population growth tool, I suppose. I hesitate to call it an economic development tool because they don't really operate that way. But RAWS gives tax breaks to individuals who move to areas that are losing population. It's expensive. It also can give tuition reimbursement if you will tolerate waiting in line to get that tuition reimbursement if you were to move to one of these counties. It seems like we add counties. In fact, I think we just had a hearing where some more were being added, and perhaps even Miami County, right south of Johnson County, keeps coming up as one to add to that. Anyway, not wanting to attack RAWS too much and wanting to give our counties real economic development tools that grow jobs that then create the need for population, I think most of us will agree that enterprise zones were an extremely effective economic development tool, and that we'd like to have those back. So what I've done is created a bill that gives a county option. So a county commission can vote, let's say Ellsworth County, for instance, if they found that enterprise zones were much more effective than RAWS, they could choose to have enterprise zones instead of RAWS. And then that way we're not dismantling either program. We don't have to have the fight with counties that just think RAWS is the greatest thing ever. Usually they're border counties that are just simply moving people from one side of the border to the other, as opposed to along I-70, where you'll find most of the counties would much rather have incentives to build and grow jobs. So I've introduced that and moved that to a hearing on Monday in appropriations, so hopefully we'll get some movement on that as well. A little bit of progress on some proposals. You might have heard the docking building that's right next to the Capitol. If you ever want a building to last forever, just build the Capitol power plant under it. This thing will not go away. But there are some proposals out there that we got some really bad numbers on, and there's no other way to say it. I mean, $370 a square foot isn't something anyone would pay for anything around here, but somehow this really ancient and decrepit building is worthy of that assessment. Anyway, I came up with the plan to bring it down to a 3-story building and rebuild as a Kansas law enforcement headquarters facility. We would then be able to retain our current power plant, and the increase in cost is about $15 million over simply tearing the whole thing down and building a completely new power plant. So if we're going to invest in something like that, I think we should get something out of it. And the part that we don't know is what we save on the other side. So if you create a 3-story building there and it costs $15 million, what do you save on the other end? And having had to deal with the budgets for the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, I can tell you that we have invested over $1.2 million in their headquarters facility, and there's a list of $5, $6, $7 million worth of capital improvements that that building needs. Getting them out of there and unloading these boondoggle buildings that the state owns and instead putting them in modern facilities is a much better expenditure of taxpayer dollars, and I hope we start moving down that road. And speaking of boondoggles, Lansing Correctional Facility, we've had some proposals by the Secretary of Corrections, and bless him, he came up with some great ideas. He's trying to solve problems. The Lansing facility is an 1860s plus a 1980s facility that is costing a fortune as well. In fact, it takes up about a third of the entire corrections system capital improvement budget on an annual basis, and it is limping along. He came up with the idea of tearing down the 1980s facility, mothballing the 1860s facility, and then doing a lease purchase to build new. He'd be able to do that within his existing budget because the current facility takes about 600, I'm rounding, 650 employees, and a new facility would take about 375. So the savings in employee costs and then also the efficiencies of the structure itself allows for about $14.1 million in annual savings. A lease purchase, they're estimating, would be about $12.5 million. We actually save money by building a new facility on that site. Great idea. However, I think it's important we have lots of options out there, so we've been seeking some other options, and closing Lansing would then save us the dollars of demolishing Lansing. If we were to close and build in a green field in a place like Abilene, we could not only have the savings of not building there, but then we would also bring jobs to this end of the state. Currently, the Lansing facility has to compete with multiple correctional facilities and law enforcement agencies up in that area, and rebuilding there does not solve that problem. So bringing those jobs this direction might be the way to go. The A&M study actually called for the closure of Stockton over there in that area, and that has to be one of the craziest things I've heard. I understand why they did it, but the Stockton-Norton facilities are probably two of the most efficiently run facilities that we have in the system, and they also have the least turnover in the entirety of the system. So closing one of those doesn't make sense necessarily. Closing Lansing does. Would also note that Kit Carson Correctional in over near Burlington, Colorado, is 11 miles from the border. It's owned by Correctional Companies of America. It has 1,488 beds. If we were to, and I'll just do some math here, so follow with me, but it has 1,488 beds. We could contract with them easily to hold inmates at that facility. Building 2 new cell houses for $27 million at El Dorado would add 512 beds. There you're at 2,000 even. Double bunking El Dorado, double bunking Larned, which is already part of the plan, brings in another 450-ish beds. It actually gives us about 100 more, 91 more beds than the current Lansing facility if we were to do a hybrid solution like that. And then we would be able to simply close Lansing and mothball the entire facility or auction it off and get it off the books, which I think is probably a better plan. But there are several ways to address that issue, and I think we'll come up with a solution before the end of the session, mostly because we need to. The correctional system, we're at 102% of capacity constantly. We've done about everything we can to reduce the number of folks who are serving time, increasing good time credits. I think we went from 60 to 90 days in the 2015 session, and then from 90 to 120 in the 2016 session. So over 2 years, we doubled it. 2 separate votes, 2 separate bills, 2 separate fights to go through to go from 60 to 120, and that's an enormous increase, and it certainly helped us with the system, but we can't keep doing that. There's not a jump from 120 to 150 and so on. That's just not something we're going to do. And then finally, I'd just note that we continue to pursue the aviation research facility at K-State Polytechnic. That's an ongoing process and will probably take us to the end of the session to get that complete. We're looking at a couple of different options there. One of them includes a temporary leasing of a existing facility on the Airport Authority property while we go through a bond and build as opposed to a lease purchase. So we're exploring a few other options there before we settle on something that's permanent. And with that, I guess we'll get to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you all for your opening remarks. Excuse me. Talk about the budget bill. The comment is that all of the other topics seem to depend on that. So if maybe each of you could touch on that for briefly.
Happy to start. I assume we're talking about 18, 19, current budget, 17. There's a couple of them out there, so I'll just talk about all of them. Okay, so we have the rescission bill, which is the year we're in, where we have to close the gap before June 30th. That bill we passed out. It does not have any cuts in it. Instead, it liquidates the pooled money investment board and goes through a process of one-time money to close that gap. We also had a few good months of revenue collection, so that number kind of ticked down a little bit as far as what the goal was that we had to meet. So the hope is that that continues, but of course we can't plan on that because numbers haven't been coming in as consistently as they have prior to 2012. And then on the 18-19 budget, right now we're still going through that process. Transportation and Public Safety submitted all of its budgets. We had very few increases. I'm in fact surprised by some of the folks who are voting to go along with the governor's ideas. I thought that was kind of surprising going through the process. But we really don't have a lot of options for expansion through budgets right now, just not knowing what the tax plans will look like. So we kind of have in our minds a base budget that mirrors essentially what the governor's recommended, and then we have things that we've recommended but set aside. So at the end of the day, if we are able to fund them, we know where our priorities are. So we have a few options on the 18-19 budget that the committees have gone through and recommended, but have not funded at this stage due to not knowing where the revenues will come from. So with that.
It was certainly my hope that we were going to be able to get the tax bill passed and 2178, but apparently the governor didn't seem to feel so as adamant about it as we were. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to override that veto, because at this point, I truly believe that if we would have tweaked that, I know that some were disappointed that it was going to increase their taxes, but I have some information that I'll be glad to share with you when we're finished. I don't want to take up everybody's time. That it really didn't increase your taxes that much because the brackets didn't change that drastically from when it was in 2012 to now. If we look at the overall tax bill that was presented and passed out of the House, passed out of the Senate, and then was vetoed by the governor, that had components in it that we were going to be able to utilize, get ourselves back on at least a level plane. And the tax committee, I'll have to really commend Representative Johnson and his staff and committee for coming up with what he did, because it really was an opportunity for us to start righting the ship. We talk about budgets and how it's going to affect individual budgets. Now, the general government budgets, the committee that I serve on, that's all fee funded, nothing from the SGF. But it still has those components in it that money has to come from somewhere, which comes out of the appropriations recommended from that committee. So it's a step by step by step. And if we can get on a level plane, then we can start working on increasing monies to agencies. On this one particular budget that I was asked to work on, it was the domestic violence services that are here it's here in the state of Kansas that are really needing funding, because the increase in domestic violence, sexual abuse has been on the increase. And there was a grant, a federal grant, that would give 90% funding towards eradicating domestic violence, but the agency had to come up with a certain amount initially in order to get that federal fund. So in the governor's budget, there was a little window of opportunity to be able to perhaps pass those funds on to that domestic violence agency, so that they would be able to get the federal funds that we desperately need. Excuse me. It keeps doing this week. I apologize. To get that agency the funding that it needs. They have to come up with was it 100 million? 1 million. 1 million. They have to come up with 1 million. And there was a window of opportunity, so I jumped on it and made a motion that those funds that were not dedicated to any certain entity at that time be given to the domestic violence so that they could go on and get this federal funding. Well, it ended up we only had $118,000, not a million there that we could give them, $118,000, but I still went ahead and made that motion, and it was included, accepted by our committee, and forwarded on to appropriations. Now what happens in appropriations is going to be something else, but I really was determined that somewhere there is a light at the end of the tunnel that we can start funding these agencies that care for our citizens and make us live in a better world. If I can at least give $118,000, it's better than nothing at all. So we'll have to see what appropriations does with it, but I was able to get that passed out of committee. So let's keep our fingers crossed, folks. I tell you, the expert is sitting to my right on budget and taxes, and I'm sure he has a whole room full of answers for you. So I'm going to pass the mic to him and get me off the hot seat. Thank you.
I will take it. I will take it.
This guy truly is the expert. I can give you a little bit of insight on a perspective of what's going on in the Senate, though. And the Senate's a little tougher animal to deal with. We didn't have quite the same results in the November election that would have provided the same kind of communication that's going on the House side. And you know, so the Senate is going through a growth period of figuring out, well, what can we do to win over enough votes to pass a bill? Right now, I've heard three or four different scenarios of the tax side of the budget, and if you put forth one bill, you're going to lose a certain segment of the Senate. If you're going to put forth another bill, you'll lose another portion of the segment of the Senate. And where I stand, and I'm part of a group of about between 10 and 12 senators out of the 31-member Republican caucus. It's a sizable chunk, and any bill that the Senate will pass must receive the blessing of this particular group. And what we are concerned about is having enough in a tax bill that would provide for a structural fix to the imbalance in the budget that we've been experiencing over the last several years. And if the proposed bill does not meet that threshold, then this group of 10 or 12 will not support it. And so we're not we're looking for compromises, I guess. But the compromise now is not to go too low in terms of how much money we have to bring in for tax revenue. Because right now, in my mind anyway, the bills that we passed and sent to the governor that were subsequently vetoed did not provide a structural fix to the imbalance, and because a couple things, neither bill, the bill that we passed, did not provide for leaving the highway fund alone. We need to provide for our highways. We need to provide for schools. We need to do some things well, the things that are important to the citizens of this state. And that tax bill did not decrease the reliance on the highway fund to run the government. And it also did not address the fact that for 8 years now, or almost 9 years, that we have not provided any pay increases for any of the state agencies. We have just let that continue to slide. So if that bill had passed, we would go back to those agencies and say, oh, guess what? You're going to go at least another 3 years without a pay increase. And during this whole period of time, the health insurance premiums have increased, cost of living increased. These people are hanging on, and I don't even know why anymore. We're just lucky that we haven't lost many of the people that have been so devoted and stellar for state agencies, and we still have them, and I don't know how we will continue to do this. In my mind, we're going to have to revisit this whole discussion in 2 more years, because it may take that long in order to get to the point where we do have a structural fix, unless, as Representative Clay's hinted at, we may be in a period where some of the oil and the ag prices are going to start coming back, and if that helps with our monthly estimates, then perhaps the situation might not be so dire. But until that happens, we're sitting on some very serious problems still. So anyway, that's my take on it so far.
Well, thank you for the question. You actually have a great overview. All the issues have been laid out. I can throw a few numbers behind some of them, but that's it. So for 17, we're down to, do we make the capers payment and borrow more from the pooled money, or do we not? I'm not sure where that will come out between the House and Senate and the conference committee. We're close enough that we're going to be able to make it on that. I, of course, will advocate for making the capers payment, because that's where I've come from consistently on that one, and I'll hope that I'm able to do that, but I don't know. As we look to 18 and 19, you got the issues. Senator Hardy laid it out exactly where we are. We started looking at where we were with the governor's budget, said we're not going to take and securitize the tobacco funds and other things. If we don't do that, do we think there are cuts that can be made? Without the cuts, we needed $580 million. By some accident, the plan that we passed happened to be projected to do $590 million. What I do know is both those numbers are wrong, but it tells us we're in the ballpark of being able to balance. But to Senator Hardy's point, I still miss 2 key elements, perhaps more, as I look at the fact that employee salaries are held the same and sweeps from KDOT are pretty much still maximized going through that. I need another roughly $170 million to do the maintenance, not the maintenance, but the preservation part of the KDOT plan. I think we are at a point where we have to look very seriously about letting any new construction enhancement projects along that, but trying to focus on how do we maintain what do we have at the moment. And then we know some of you travel on roads that safety enhancements are needed that are there. We have to figure out how to get to some of those key ones, but it's going to be, we do have to figure out how do we make sure that we maintain at the level that we want to maintain, and that has to be a priority that we get to. So from the numbers that we used there, yeah, we've had some decent experience in the last couple of months. We're up, what, 70 million over 2 months, roughly. I would expect that we're up, and I'm making up numbers, but if I were trying to plan for myself, I'd say that by the end of June, we should be up maybe 120 million by then, not because we've totally turned the corner, but because the estimates are finally low enough. I think we've got a good shot at hitting them, right? I do think that we may have turned the corner also. So as we look at 2 years, we absolutely will have to review it. Either we're going to have some economic growth that's made things better and gives us a chance to do a few other things, or we won't, and it will be ever more challenging to continue to do the things that we are doing, and how you manage to pull that together. Nonetheless, it's amazing how quickly I forget exactly what the budget shortfall was for 19. It was 400 some million. Was it 450? 450. Again, by some accident, the tax plan was projected to raise 453. So it was just getting there, roughly. And it was a start to kind of see, can we pass a tax plan that fills the gap? Because it's no fun to vote for a tax plan. And to make it work, the worst thing about the tax plan, I didn't want to vote for this part of it either, was the retroactivity. What a terrible way to implement stuff. So then the continued discussion is what is less terrible than that? And we need your continued feedback to say what is less terrible from everywhere, to say, okay, what pain are we going to endure? The other pain then is the priorities as we try and meet the budget. But I don't think the cuts come from the education side. I'm going to guess we're going to need something more on the education side. I would say the good news with some consistency is you don't need it all at a point in time. Let's just use a round figure of saying we decide it's 500 million more that we need in education. Don't hang on to that number. It's just a round number. If I put 500 million more into education on starting July 1, the ability to deploy that effectively would be at least somewhat challenged. It could absolutely be used. But generally, you ease into that, which is what happened the last time the court was there. Putting a big chunk of money in one spot provides the opportunity for at least some inefficiency. Not that it would be used poorly, but if I had that, I'd put more in reserves. I'd do other things, and I think it gives us the opportunity to not have the shock to the revenue side while still meeting the immediate needs of the education side. So I'll welcome your feedback on that as well. But it's some more dollars that we need. Will the growth that we may be experiencing, will a change in our ability to forecast where we are to try and get closer to those numbers give us another $200 million through the next year? It's actually possible. But those are the decisions that we have to sit down in the next week and say, okay, here's our best guess at how this works, what we have to do to try and say, can we get a few raises where they need to be? Can I get another 100, 120, 170 to transportation? Can I get what I need to try and get through first holding education where it is, meeting what we need to take care of all the schools that have grown and haven't gotten a dollar? And those are the things that we have to continue to come forward with. We spent some time going through numbers with revenue yesterday afternoon, trying to get some handles on what different brackets, what would happen. There's no magic to any of them. We could accomplish a revenue plan with a single bracket. If you just slide the bottom end of who doesn't pay tax, you can almost have the same effect as having several brackets, except you don't capture the really high end. There's some energy around that. If I vary the rate by 0.2, which is what the tax plan did, it went from 5.25 to 5.45, only because the 2012 tax plan went from 6.25 to 6.45. So we had anchored on that number. But that's not a huge change in the impact. We talked to the Tax Foundation and some others and said, you know, is that big a change added complexity or added revenue? At that point, it was kind of generally felt that we were trying to make ourselves feel better and adding complexity rather than adding an enhanced package. So do we make the brackets more meaningful? Can we divide ourselves from anchoring on those old numbers and come up with a clean slate of what we do going forward to try and hit that? All that feedback is there, but then it starts to get, well, you actually lowered the bracket for this person, but you raised it for these two, is often the discussion that comes out. We'll see where we wind up, but I'm going to guess that the revenue that's raised from the tax plan that's ultimately passed is slightly higher, as Senator Hardy alluded, than the one that we passed the last time. How and when that eventually gets done, I'm not entirely sure. So, but I'll quit and ask the next question.
If state agencies have to make cuts to get funds, then why not for schools and other people receiving state funds to have to put a plan in place also?
Well, I see that Superintendent Hall is in the audience, and I'm sure he's going to listen to this one. I truly feel that the schools are already working diligently to make things as least expensive as possible. Everything has to be on a plan, a basic plan. And you have a basic plan, and that's called the school finance formula. That allocates where each dollar goes and where it's spent. And just like everything else, the cost of everything has risen. I mean, it's not something that we have complete control over. So the LOBs, I have the Kansas school financing right here, the general operating funds based on weighted per pupil, adjusted district enrollment, depends on how many kids you have in each area. Academic preparations, technical skills, employability, civic engagement. These are all things that come under that finance formula. How a school operates. Equalization formulas, general operating funds, local option budgets. All of these components, this is a plan. So we have a plan in education, just like all the other agencies do. And it was truly, and in the Gannon lawsuit, it was noted that we had not met the amount that was needed to meet that fund. And we're not looking that they're just saying, oh, well, we need this for this. And just draw something out of midair. They need the money for things that are basics, that are being needed by these schools that we have in Kansas to educate our children. So let's say, for instance, what will it take financially for Kansas to lead the world in the success of each student? Kindergartner readiness, an individual plan of study, focused on the student's career interest, high school graduation rates, post-secondary completion and attendance, social emotional growth measured locally. A successful high school graduate has the academic preparation, cognitive preparation, technical skills, employability skills, civic engagement to be successful in post-secondary education, and the attainment of an industry-recognized certification or in the workforce without the need of remediation. Sorry, my voice is just shot today. I brought this with me because this is what we are looking at in coming up with a comprehensive finance formula for our schools. It's not that schools say, hey, we want this for something that really isn't necessary. They have cut back. We want qualified teachers to be coming into our state to work in our schools. Preparation of our children, all-day kindergarten was the best thing that ever happened in our area. We need to enhance that capability of these children from the day they enter the school in a kindergarten arena till they graduate from high school and go on to whatever career that they choose. So if you're looking at that entity, education to me is the focus of what we need to be looking at. Granted, each agency needs to have their funding, and each agency has a plan. And we are working diligently in the tax plan that Representative Johnson and his co-chair came up with. We're looking at economic development for our community to bring businesses in here and increase the capability of each and every community from the rural area to the metropolitan areas in Johnson County. But there is just so much money to go around. And this is what we are so diligently focused on at this point. But the education environment, trust me, is not being overspending. They are watching every single penny. So that, I believe, would answer that question.
I'll just add some numbers to Diana's point, Representative Dirk's point. There were a few things mentioned here, and I point this out just so you have some numbers that go behind it. But if we were to add back in the money for our highway system and actually fully fund, that's $530 million. The schools, it depends on how you want to calculate it, but if you go back to the 92 formula essentially, and you go back to when the last Supreme Court came down with a decision that the finance formula and its funding were constitutional, and then you add in inflation, you get to about $709 million in underfunding. And then it was mentioned also adding in the Capers payment, and if you put all of those together, you get $1.354 billion in additional spending. Add that then to the 2018 deficit, and of course those numbers could be wrong. You could, come up with all sorts of ways to calculate how to answer the court because it's not really a defined number. But add that to the 18 deficit, and it's really difficult to imagine a tax plan that actually gets us there, because that's a California-style tax plan. 11 cents in additional gas tax would get us up to 35 cents a gallon, which is more than double Missouri, and that's $200 million additional dollars that doesn't get us anywhere close to 530. A penny in sales tax brings in an additional $350 million per penny, so you can imagine how many pennies that has to go up. Just in 2018 alone, our preservation needs to maintain our current ratings on the highway system, $338 million. I would just point out also that the cost drivers that exist in our budget and create about 80% of our spending are Medicaid, K-12, and higher education. And if you hold those things harmless, there's not really a lot of other places to go. I mean, we've already talked about corrections. We're at 102% of capacity. There's not really a place to cut there. Public safety is kind of out of the question. We were 100 troopers short of hitting the number that's necessary to cover the entire state of Kansas with highway patrolmen. We'd have to go back. There's just not a lot of there when it comes to making additional cuts. So I think, when we discuss these kinds of things about cuts, I think all the cuts have been made. I think we've gone down the road, and if you look back at past reductions that have been maintained year over year, you'll see that higher education has taken some pretty serious cuts over time, and that KDOT clearly, we've gotten to the point where literally we're sweeping all but $2 million of the sales tax out of that. There's really no point in having the statute anymore that puts it in there if it's just going to come right back out. However, the gas tax being protected doesn't seem to make much of a difference, because doubling over Missouri's tax just sends people across a street. And we've already got problems along that border, in the sense that if you go to 135th and State Line Road, look at the Missouri side: Walmart, Lowe's, Target, Walgreens, CVS, all sorts of gas stations. What's on the Kansas side? It's cornfield. Literally, other side of the street, cornfield. So policy makes that happen. Policies are what drives what's on one side of the street and what's on the other. And you can see it play out right there in a pretty significant and impactful way. But to the point of the question, why not K-12? Well, I think because we want a education system that prepares our students for college, careers, and life, and we want to fund it at such a way that that's possible. We currently only fund a half day of kindergarten, and then through at-risk and I say currently, the block grant really doesn't, but if you go back to the way that we did things initially in the 92 formula and whatnot, then at-risk dollars can now go towards that. But the at-risk formula is kind of, it's based on something that I think doesn't truly identify a student who's at risk. You can be from a wealthy family and still have a kid who's at risk. So the free and reduced lunch does not necessarily identify whether a student is at risk or not. You can have a impoverished student who is not at risk. And so that eligibility doesn't necessarily make sense to have that in the formula. So I think there are things that we can do that target those dollars better, and that's essentially what the court said to us. The court said a lot of things that were obvious, like June 30th, you have to have a solution. Well, yeah, because the block grant expires. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. And they said things like the bottom 25 are underperforming. Well, yeah, obviously, we get that. So we have to come up with those solutions, but those solutions are going to cost money. They aren't free necessarily, and I do think that they require additional funding. So that's probably the route we're going to have to go. But just looking at some of the other things, I don't know that there are really cuts or opportunities for cuts available, and some of them are just politically difficult. I mean, try taking $500,000 away from public radio. Good luck. That kind of stuff just doesn't happen up at the State House. So there are places that I suppose you could cut, but those probably aren't going to get cut. So I think we've gone down that road as far as we're going to go.
How depressing is that? The thought just occurred to me back in 2012 when I heard the phrase, this is going to give Kansas a shot of adrenaline to the heart. I think we gave Kansas a lethal injection to the heart. And that is the reason I ran back in November. We have done Kansas and the people of Kansas no favors by the decisions that we've made over the last 4 years. And it has created almost a generational kind of problem that we have to overcome. The problems we have are severe. They're difficult to even comprehend. When I see the numbers, it's hard for me to understand them. I think that we can emerge from this situation, but what I consider that we are doing now is that we are stopping the hemorrhaging. And that is an important step to correcting our fiscal situation. But then the job is not done, because we have existing needs to meet the priorities of Kansas citizens, and we'll just need to continue to work towards meeting those priorities. But it's going to take some real time. And we were talking about one thought that came to me when Representative Clays was talking about the needs of the prison system. Well, I'm taking a little bit different approach here. I would like to take a slice of the Department of Corrections budget and put it into pre-K, because I think that the problems that we have in our society stem from the fact that kids from very early on do not have the support at home to succeed in life. And I think that the more help that we can provide to young children, so that when they hit kindergarten, instead of having a 400-word vocabulary, they have a 4,000-word vocabulary, that will help a lot in moving those kids onto a life of where they can be successful, productive citizens. So I think it's some of the things we need to do, I think, just take about thinking of things differently. Let's think outside the box a little bit in solving some of the issues that confront us. And I think I'm disappointed, but I'm not discouraged. I think that we can take these problems that are severe, that are close to crippling, and deal with them. But we're going to have to. We're biting off a little chunk at a time, and we'll have to continue to do that. But it won't all happen this year. And I hope that the people in both houses understand that and know that we're going to have to address the situation again until we get it right.
I'll try to be quick. Why not cut education as well as everyone else, I think, was the nutshell of the question. So the short answer is probably the court decision. The more involved answer is looking at each of the things. So for 17, facing a big hole, the right time to cut was probably November through allotments by the governor to make a plan and have enough of the year left that you could actually react. The second possible plan, thankfully our school boards and our superintendents are solution-oriented people, is to sit down and say, before the pooled money fund showed up, how are we going to make it through, and how much can we figure out? And there might have been a 50, 60 million solution even in January that we could have come up with, and it's March. That's off the table. We've got a way that goes forward. So that takes care of where we are in 17, 18. That comes down to the court decision. The bigger decision is all of us. What do we want to do? The discussion has been there a long time, legislature, courts, et cetera. I've heard it back before I was very aware of what was going on, even as a student. What do we want? It is absolutely, we need more money for early childhood education. That seems to be the #1 priority, and we can effectively deploy those dollars. I think the place to make decisions actually is closer to where they are. Our school boards, I think, do a good job of defining resources that they need and where to deploy them. If collectively we say no, we as a state can't, and this is collectively, this isn't us, it's who you, we can't spend that much. We'll figure out how we best try and meet part of the educational need. But it comes down to our priority to get there. Right now, between who we have elected in the legislature and certainly the court decision that pulls that even higher than where the legislature is, I don't see that as a likely alternative that is there. Education is the biggest part that we have to do, but we have to meet the other objectives as well. So how do we do that? The fair allocation of funds, as I was counseled in my first year, is very hard because everyone will always see something as not being fair. There is some finite level of how much is available. To the senator's point, we have to make sure we get that part right too. What do we need to be able to invest to provide the state services? We haven't gotten that right for the last several years. How do we then allocate it? We'll have to continue to weigh in.
And still on the budget. However, we're rapidly running out of time, so we have a few specific questions that are directed at individual legislators, so I would like to at least try and get to a few of those. And some of them are related in a way, but maybe we'll start since Representative Johnson has the microphone. It says, status of bill removing tax exemptions for recreation complexes and uses, and the impacts that would have on city parks and recreation activities, impact on YMCA. Those are questions.
So is that the YMCA bill and the taxation on that? So there was a bill to be heard on Tuesday specifically. That bill actually isn't being heard. It was related to the sales tax on services bill, which is still being heard. I don't think either of those go anywhere this year. The part of that I think is relevant is the broader context of what our tax policy looks like and relooking at sales tax exemptions across the board. In my ideal world, there'd be a group over the summer that sets the criteria by which we would define we want a sales tax exemption, then apply those exemptions against the criteria. And a number of things could be at risk at that point, possibly even part of, it wouldn't be all, but it might be the part of memberships or other things that are determined to be taxable in various worlds, could be taxable in that scenario. Still pretty vague at this point, but I think the concept of the service tax bill tagging on to the exemptions has some possible legs. The one that specifically attacked the YMCA, I don't see going forward. So anyway, and the fact that the author of the bill actually said that he was satisfied with the other bill having a hearing and letting me take that one off the calendar was encouraging to that end.
Senator Hardy, could you please explain your no vote on Senate Bill 55 that would have restored local control on public construction projects? And then the second question, sorry, is there another bill that does that in either house?
Trying to reconstruct that one. I'm thinking about it as in a different.
If you want to take a few minutes, we have another one that we can
okay,
go
yeah.
to.
Why don't you
Sure.
Back to this one.
You bet. Representative Clays, this one is for you. It says, if you could please review your tax proposal in House Bill 2385.
Sure. It's a 3.9% flat tax, and then it requires for qualifying for the small business exemption W-2 full-time employees.
Didn't give you much time, Senator Hardy. Sorry about that. Explain why you passed tax exemptions and tax credits, given Kansas's vast revenue hole, without first ensuring the state is solvent. And there's no specific tax exemptions or tax credits listed, but just a general question, I think.
Well, I've certainly introduced a few, so I'll go ahead and take this one. Tax exemptions and tax credits are designed to incentivize certain activities. So what we're attempting to do is incentivize in areas where we're receiving zero tax dollars now. For instance, the aerospace tax credit is used currently in Oklahoma, so you can look at what Oklahoma's numbers are as far as job creation. Kansas has lost 17% of its aviation workforce. The state of Oklahoma has increased its by 90% since that law was passed. We have seen aerospace downturns in Kansas, and we say things like, oh, we lost those jobs. Those jobs were lost, and sometimes they'll come back. But this time, it's not that they're not coming back, it's that they're not coming back here. They're coming back in Oklahoma, in Georgia, in North Carolina, and in those states you see the same types of numbers. Georgia, 110%, North Carolina, somewhere in the 70s. Tremendous rebounds in those areas for those aerospace jobs because they have tax credits like this that are working. So if we're receiving $0 now from jobs that don't exist, receiving $0 for 5 years from jobs that do exist makes sense. The idea then is that we have to target these incentives. You have to make sure that they're not being given to people who would already do these things anyway. So we carefully construct those things, and the Oklahoma bill is essentially what we push through on that one, just as an example. So when you see things like, oh, it costs $20 million, well, it's $20 million that we don't get now that we won't get for the 5 years of the program. Okay, but you get 500 jobs. You get 500 engineers, you get 500 families, you get 500 people who graduated from Kansas schools who stay in Kansas, plant their roots in Kansas, and then have those jobs into the future. You can just look at the Oklahoma process and you can see that immediately after they implemented that, they were able to draw Boeing. Who did we lose? We lost Boeing. They literally moved right across the border into another state, into Oklahoma City, and built a brand new facility, and they house engineers there because they have this tax credit. And the tax credit incentivizes them, but mostly it incentivizes the employee. So we're targeting that towards the employees because we want the people to stay here, live here, go to our schools, and raise their families here. And that's the long-term goal of those tax credits. So I would hesitate to ever trust a fiscal note that has dollar amounts applied to programs that incentivize job creation. The Ad Astra Rural Jobs Act, we currently have these companies that invest in these businesses aren't investing here. They just don't. That doesn't happen. If they invest tomorrow and they pay no tax on that through a tax credit, we weren't receiving the dollars before, but now we've got the business. Now we've got the incentive in there that put those jobs into those communities that qualify. So, and it's temporary. The tax credits aren't permanent. They aren't ongoing. They're temporary. So once the people are here, they stay because they've planted their roots. They're raising their families, and that's what we want to see more of. We have to keep people here, and programs like RAWS just simply don't work to do that. I won't beat up on RAWS too much because a lot of the border counties, like I said, they really like that program to be able to draw people right across the border. But in areas like ours at the center of the state, those types of programs don't work. And we don't have it here in Salina County, but I'm speaking of next door in Ellsworth County. And the rising tide lifts all boats. We want Ellsworth County to be successful. We want McPherson County to be successful, Dickinson, Ottawa. We want those around us to be successful because it does help us. We have people who drive to Ellsworth for jobs. We have people who drive from Ellsworth to Salina for jobs, Salina to McPherson. So it's important that this region kind of stay cohesive when it comes to economic development and the things that we do to incentivize certain activities in these areas. But the end goal is to create jobs and to retain the educated workforce that we have here in our communities.
On the final action on that bill, I voted in favor of it. The dissenting vote on that one was Senator Petty. And frankly, I do. Let's see. This one's kind of fuzzy. It didn't come through my my own committees. The League of Kansas Municipalities spoke in opposition to the bill, and initially, and that prompted concerns on my part because of the suggested that the bill would infringe on local control. So that I did have some concerns about it, but I voted for the final version of the bill. So it was only one senator, Senator Petty, that voted in opposition to it.
Thank you all very much. I apologize for the questions that we did not get to, but we're down to about 10 minutes by my watch, and so with closing, that only gives a few minutes for each legislator for closing remarks. So again, sincerely apologize for the few questions I didn't get to. I tried to stick to, there's always it seems like each time there's been a general theme for the majority of the questions. So, and certainly the budget is a very big issue, so I understand why there were that many questions. So prior to the closing remarks, I just wanted to let everybody know that the next legislative issues meeting will be held Saturday, May 20th, same time and location. And certainly appreciate everybody's attendance today, and obviously thank the legislators for taking the time out of their morning. I'm sure it's a very busy period during the session, so thank you for taking the time to come to Salina and share with us, and we'll end with a few minutes of closing remarks by each one. Thank you again.
Thank you once again for coming out and participating in this process. This government does not happen if people did not participate. And one thing I will say, I'm amazed at the number of people that do participate every single day in the matters that happen at the state government. With the number of emails I get, I'm getting postcards from people back here that it's really is impressive. I like having the communications from people back here in the district. And also, before I forget, I did leave a sign-up sheet in the back of the on the table for anyone that has not signed up for my weekly email newsletter. I'd love to have you receiving that. That gives you a summary of exactly what's going on in Topeka from my perspective. And so I hope you would take advantage of that and just keep in touch.
Well, thank you for being here, and I can stay until about 10:30, so if folks have questions, I'm sorry we didn't get to a lot of them, but I would welcome the chance to continue those discussions. On the tax question that was at the end, we haven't passed any exemptions out of the tax committee. There is a RAWS bill that did include 2 counties. It's below the line. I don't know that we'll get to that. But there have been some other bills that have addressed that, but we've had several hearings, but nothing has passed on that particular topic. I'd be surprised if we are adding any at this time. There are a couple compelling ones, but I'm not sure that those will move forward. But appreciate your feedback as we continue forward, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, AT&T and the Chamber for having this. And it's always a delight to come back home when you have a voice and visit with each and every one of you and answer your questions as best as we can. Some of us do not sit on the tax committee, but we do try to keep abreast of what's going on. And as the rumors come down, we can evaluate them to see, okay, will this be something that could be useful? And I try to sit in on those committees whenever I have an opportunity. But, and then some of our committees, you know, are just kind of, we're working bills, but I don't see any of those coming above the line at this point. We really do have important issues that we have to address. And thank you so much for being here, and I too will stay after if you have any questions, and it's always a delight to be here. And thanks for the invitation once again.
Thanks again for spending your Saturday morning with us. Thanks again to AT&T and the Chamber for sponsoring this. I'm just going to use the closing moments to talk a little bit more about Star Bonds and the Star Bond project. Every community wants to have good-paying jobs, and we want to be able to attract those folks to Salina. We want to be able to attract those jobs to Salina, and a big part of that is having a community that has some of the amenities that people seek, who have good-paying jobs. And who can work at those good-paying jobs at those new facilities. So we have several pieces that have to come together, and many of them have long before we ever were elected or sat foot in this room. Things like having our Kansas Highway Patrol Training Center here, having the National Guard Training Center here, being right next to the Smoky Hill Bombing Range, the Crisis City development with the Department of Emergency Management. We have public safety agencies that are just tremendous here, and we also have the Polytechnic campus of a university sitting here on our airport runway. We have 36 state-owned aircraft out there, and we have just tremendous programs that need to be supported. You know, all of those things start to come together. We have bond issues for our schools that put in new facilities and all-day kindergarten that attracts folks here too. And then a big part of that is attracting folks is having a downtown that's vibrant, having a walkable community place to go to enjoy restaurants and activities, things like the bowling alley that'll be here, having hotels that are near our Bicentennial Center, Tony's Pizza Event Center, and near our downtown, near our hospital. Having all of those things, it's meaningful, and it makes bringing jobs here a heck of a lot easier. It makes us a much more attractive community to live and work in, and to raise a family in. We want great schools. We want that attractive downtown. We want to have a great university with excellent, top-rated, nationally recognized programs, and we want to have those state facilities that complement that. The entire reason that we have a UAS program is because of the Greensburg tornado. And having public safety agencies be able to use that technology to save lives. We have to have those things. And June 30th, when Star Bonds expire, should the Senate, and I assume the House will act, but should the Senate not act, we're going to lose something that's just $150 million investment, only $19 million of which is from the Star Bonds, and to have the entirety of a project like that, as massive as it is, as many people as it took to come together and collaborate on that, local people, not outside developers, local people who came together and said that we need to do something about this downtown, we need to make it an attractive place that people will want to go to, that they would be willing to invest $130 million into our downtown is just amazing. And to have the state take that away because they have bad feelings about Prairie Fire or a Topeka project that was doomed from the start, I can rattle off 15 Star Bond projects that have been immensely successful. In fact, one right now is delivering $42 million in sales tax in one Star Bond project to the state. $42 million comes from Village West alone. And that would not exist had it not been for Star Bonds. And I would hate to see that happen to us, that we lose out on what could be the difference maker between bringing in the jobs that we want to see here in Salina and not. So I would encourage everyone to contact your senator and all of your House members, and in fact, Susan Wagle specifically, and let her know that at the very least, those projects that are in process need to be seen through, that obstinately standing in the way of investments that have already been made, and investments have already been made, and shutting those down, it's not something that we do here in Kansas, and we won't stand idly by and watch it happen. But I would encourage you to take some time to make known how important this is to our community, because it is extremely important to our community. And as much as budget and taxes are interesting topics to talk about, this can be something that for 50 years is a difference maker for us. So I'd encourage you to spend a few minutes making your voice heard. And thanks again for spending Saturday with us.